Let me start by saying this wasn't how I imagined my life would go. When we bought the house on Maple Ridge Drive 3 years ago, it was supposed to be our sanctuary, a quiet place where my husband, Mark, and I could raise our kids and escape the chaos of city life. Our property had a well instead of municipal water because, honestly, who doesn't love the idea of being self-sufficient? It felt rustic, wholesome, almost poetic. The sound of water pumping from deep underground gave me a sense of pride. We weren't just homeowners. We were stewards of the land. But then she showed up. Karen Miller, president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, with her clipboard, designer sunglasses, and an ego bigger than her McMansion down the street. From day one, she made it clear she didn't approve of us, or rather, anything about our non-conforming lifestyle. First, it was complaints about our chicken coop. She called them livestock, like they were cows or something, even though they were just 6 hens providing fresh eggs for our family. Then came the cease and desist letter over our wind turbine. Apparently, it was visually disruptive, though no one else seemed bothered by it except Karen. And don't even get me started on the time she tried to fine us for planting wildflowers in our backyard because they were too unruly. Unruly flowers. Really? Still, none of that prepared me for what happened last week. It was early morning, and I stepped outside to enjoy the crisp air before starting my day. The sun was just peeking over the trees, casting golden light across the yard. But as I walked toward the well house, something felt off. There was a strange smell, like wet cement, and a low hum of machinery fading into the distance. My stomach tightened as I pushed open the gate and froze. There it was, bags of concrete mix scattered around the well, half-empty sacks lying crumpled on the ground. Worse still, the mouth of the well, the very thing that brought water into our home, was filled with thick gray sludge. Someone had deliberately poured concrete into it. Shock turned to anger as I realized who must have been behind this. Who else would do such a thing? Sure enough, moments later, Karen strolled up the driveway like she owned the neighborhood. Which, let's face it, she probably thought she did. Dressed in her usual pristine outfit, she stopped near the edge of our property and crossed her arms. Her lips curled into a smug smile as she looked at the mess. "Just resolving a code violation," she said coolly, her voice dripping with superiority. "Your wellhead is unsightly and violates HOA guidelines. Consider this a permanent solution." Unsightly. Permanent. I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stared at her, trying to process what she'd done. This wasn't just a petty complaint about flowers or chickens. This was sabotage. This was personal. And Karen had crossed a line I never thought anyone would dare cross. As she turned to leave, tossing her hair over her shoulder, I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Oh, Karen, honey, you have no idea what you just stepped into." Mark nearly lost it when I told him what happened. He was in the middle of fixing a leaky faucet when I walked into the house, my hands trembling and my voice shaking as I explained Karen's latest stunt. His face turned red, veins popping out on his forehead. For a moment, I thought he might grab his toolbox and march straight over to Karen's house. But I held him back. As much as I wanted to confront her too, I knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. We needed a plan, a smart one. That night, after putting the kids to bed, we sat at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and started digging. I pulled out the HOA handbook, the thick binder they handed us when we moved in. It was full of rules about everything from mailbox colors to fence heights, but nothing mentioned wells being unsightly or requiring approval for their existence. In fact, the only guideline related to water sources said homeowners were responsible for maintaining their systems, not destroying them. While Mark flipped through the pages, I opened my laptop and began searching online for information about Karen. Turns out, she wasn't just strict, she was sloppy. Over the years, neighbors had quietly grumbled about her bending or outright breaking rules whenever it suited her. Her pool extension, It encroached 2 feet onto common land, which was strictly prohibited. The garage conversion she bragged about during HOA meetings, done without permits, and that beautiful pergola she loved to show off, 5 feet taller than the allowed maximum height. Each discovery felt like finding pieces of a puzzle, and slowly, a picture of opportunity began to emerge. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a way to turn the tables on Karen, to make her actions backfire spectacularly. That's when inspiration struck. What if I used her own obsession with rules against her? After all, Karen lived and breathed the HOA handbook. If I could prove she violated it herself, she'd have no choice but to back down. The next morning, I sent her an email. I kept it polite, almost friendly. "Dear Karen," I wrote, "thank you for addressing the well issue. I appreciate your efforts to maintain neighborhood standards. However, since this solution has rendered our primary water source unusable, could we discuss alternative options?" Predictably, she replied within minutes, gloating about how efficient her team had been and suggesting we install a new well elsewhere. At our own expense, of course. Perfect. She'd taken the bait. I spent the rest of the day filing complaints. First, I contacted the county health department, explaining that someone had improperly disposed of concrete waste into our well. This triggered an investigation, which naturally led inspectors to Karen's doorstep, since she openly admitted to authorizing the work. While they poked around her property, I reached out to a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes. Together, we drafted a lawsuit alleging negligence, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Every word was carefully chosen, every claim backed by documentation. By the time I finished, I had created a dossier so thorough it could have rivaled a spy novel. Photos of the ruined well, screenshots of Karen's emails, legal citations. It was all there. But the real kicker came when I reread the HOA covenant requiring unanimous board approval for any major structural changes affecting shared resources. Guess who forgot to secure that before dumping concrete into someone else's property? Yep, Karen. As I closed my laptop that evening, a small smile crept onto my face. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she had no idea what was coming. She walked right into my trap. And now, it was only a matter of time before the consequences caught up with her. The next step was all about patience. I knew Karen would expect me to react. Maybe yell, cry, or even beg her to fix the well. But giving her that satisfaction wasn't part of the plan. Instead, I decided to play along, letting her believe she'd won. This meant keeping my cool, no matter how infuriating she became. I sent her another email the following day, this time thanking her for her helpful suggestions about installing a new well. I made sure to sound clueless, almost naive, as if I didn't understand the gravity of what she'd done. "I'm looking into the costs of drilling a new well," I wrote. "Could you clarify whether the HOA will cover any of the expenses since this seems to be related to neighborhood standards?" Her reply came quickly, dripping with condescension. "Unfortunately, this is your responsibility," she wrote. "The HOA cannot fund personal projects." Perfect. She was walking deeper into the trap without realizing it. Every email, every interaction. It was all adding fuel to the fire I was building. And while she thought she was in control, I was busy laying the groundwork for her downfall. Behind the scenes, things were moving fast. The county health department had already launched its investigation into the improper disposal of concrete waste. Inspectors visited our property, taking notes and snapping photos of the ruined well. They asked detailed questions about who authorized the work, and I made sure to mention Karen's name repeatedly. Predictably, they soon paid her a visit, asking similar questions at her house. Neighbors whispered about seeing inspectors poking around her backyard, examining her prized landscaping features. It was satisfying to watch her squirm, even from afar. Meanwhile, I reached out to other neighbors discreetly, sharing what had happened. At first, many were hesitant to speak up, fearing retaliation from Karen. But once I showed them the evidence I'd gathered, not just about the well, but also about her own violations. They began opening up. One neighbor admitted she hated the way Karen micromanaged everyone's lives. Another confessed he'd been fined unfairly for a minor infraction years ago. Slowly, people started joining forces, ready to take a stand against her reign of terror. With growing support from the community, I turned my attention back to the HOA board. I requested an emergency meeting, citing urgent concerns about neighborhood governance. Karen, ever eager to assert her authority, agreed immediately, likely assuming I'd use the platform to plead my case about the well. What she didn't know was that I'd already prepared a presentation so thorough it could bring her entire operation crashing down. In the days leading up to the meeting, I rehearsed my arguments, refining every detail. I printed copies of documents, organized photos, and highlighted key sections of the HOA handbook. Mark joked that I looked like I was preparing for a courtroom drama, but this wasn't entertainment, it was war. And I intended to win. On the morning of the meeting, I woke up early, nerves buzzing beneath my skin. I dressed carefully, choosing something professional yet approachable, a soft blouse and tailored pants. As I drove to the clubhouse, I replayed the plan in my mind, visualizing each step. By the end of the day, Karen wouldn't just regret pouring concrete into my well. She'd wish she'd never crossed me at all. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. For too long, Karen had wielded power recklessly, trampling over anyone who dared challenge her. Today, that power was going to crumble, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it did. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel the tension in the air as I walked into the clubhouse. The room was filled with neighbors, some curious, others nervous, and a few who looked downright uncomfortable. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual spot, tapping her pen against a notepad like she owned the place. She glanced up as I entered, giving me a smug smile that made my blood boil. But I kept my expression calm, almost pleasant, as I took my seat. When it was finally time to start, Karen cleared her throat and began speaking in her typical authoritative tone. "Let's get this meeting underway," she announced, scanning the room like a queen surveying her subjects. "We have several items on the agenda today, including updates on recent neighborhood improvements." Before she could dive into her rehearsed speech, I raised my hand politely. "Actually, Karen," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I'd like to address something important before we proceed." She blinked, caught off guard for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Go ahead." Standing up, I placed a folder on the table in front of me. It contained every piece of evidence I'd gathered. Photos of the ruined well, copies of emails where she admitted authorizing the concrete dumping, screenshots of HOA guidelines she had violated herself, and even notes from the county health department's ongoing investigation. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table toward her. "As many of you may know," I began, addressing the entire room, "our family recently experienced a serious issue involving our water well. Someone decided it was unsightly and took it upon themselves to fill it with concrete." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I saw Karen stiffen slightly in her chair. This wasn't just inconvenient, it rendered our primary water source unusable. And worse, it was done without consulting us or following proper procedures. Karen interrupted, her voice sharp. As I'd already explained, this was a necessary action to resolve a code violation. If there are concerns about costs, those can be discussed privately. I smiled faintly, letting her dig herself deeper. "Oh, I'm not here to discuss costs, Karen. I'm here to talk about accountability. You see, I've consulted with experts, including lawyers, and they agree that your actions constitute willful destruction of private property. Not only that, but you failed to secure unanimous board approval before making such a drastic change, which is required under HOA guidelines." Her face paled as whispers spread around the room. People leaned forward, eager to hear more. I pressed on, pulling out another document. "And let's not forget the county health department's findings. They're currently investigating this incident as improper waste disposal, a violation that could result in significant fines for you personally. Karen's composure cracked. You wouldn't dare. Oh, but I already did. I cut in smoothly, holding up the lawsuit paperwork. And here's the best part. Thanks to your little stunt, I now have grounds to challenge every single decision this board has made under your leadership, starting with that illegal pergola of yours. I pointed to a photo I'd printed earlier, showing how her beloved structure exceeded height restrictions by a good 5 feet. The room erupted into murmurs. Some neighbors exchanged shocked glances. Others looked downright gleeful. Karen sputtered, trying to defend herself, but no one was listening anymore. Even members of the HOA board shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with her. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. Karen's reign was over. The board unanimously voted to remove her as president, citing misconduct and misuse of authority. As she gathered her things and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for everyone she bullied along the way. It wasn't easy standing up to someone like Karen, but seeing her arrogance crumble was worth every second of effort. This victory wasn't just about fixing my well. It was about proving that no one is above the rules, not even the person enforcing them. In the weeks that followed the HOA meeting, Karen's downfall unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. The county health department didn't waste any time pursuing their investigation into the improper disposal of concrete waste. Inspectors returned to her property multiple times, poking around her backyard and asking pointed questions about who authorized the work on my well. Each visit left her looking more frazzled than the last. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, sharing updates about what they'd seen or heard. Apparently, Karen had started parking her car in the garage instead of leaving it in the driveway, a move that only fueled speculation she was trying to hide something. But the real hammer came when the county issued a hefty fine for environmental violations. According to the report, dumping concrete into a water source wasn't just careless, it was illegal. And since Karen admitted to authorizing the act, she couldn't pass the blame onto anyone else. She tried, of course, claiming the construction crew misunderstood her instructions, but no one bought it. Her excuses sounded hollow even to her closest allies, assuming she had any left by that point. Meanwhile, other neighbors began filing grievances against her unauthorized projects. One couple complained about how her oversized pergola blocked sunlight from reaching their garden. Another neighbor reported her pool extension encroaching on common land, demanding it be removed immediately. Then there was the issue of her garage conversion, which lacked proper permits. Every complaint added another layer of pressure until it felt like the walls were closing in around her. Things got so bad that Karen stopped attending HOA meetings altogether. Linda, the soft-spoken retiree who replaced her as president, promised sweeping reforms to prevent future abuses of power. Under her leadership, the board agreed to cover the cost of repairing our well and compensate us for damages caused by Karen's actions. It wasn't charity, it was damage control. They knew they needed to make things right before the situation spiraled further out of control. As for Karen, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She started avoiding eye contact with neighbors during walks, clutching her designer handbag like it might protect her from judgment. Rumor had it she put her house on the market shortly after resigning as HOA president. Whether it was guilt, shame, or simply the weight of constant scrutiny, living on Maple Ridge Drive had become unbearable for her. Even her husband seemed eager to leave, judging by the way he avoided conversations at the mailbox. Watching her pack up her belongings and drive away for the last time felt surreal. For months, she'd been an unstoppable force, ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist. Now she was gone, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors. Some people joked about throwing a party to celebrate, but honestly, I didn't feel the need. Seeing justice served was celebration enough. Still, I couldn't help reflecting on everything that had happened. Standing up to Karen wasn't easy. It required patience, strategy, and a willingness to fight back when provoked. But it also taught me something valuable. Sometimes, The hardest battles lead to the sweetest victories. By taking a stand, not only did we reclaim our sense of peace, but we also inspired others to do the same. Neighbors who once feared speaking out now felt empowered to voice their concerns without hesitation. That shift alone made all the effort worthwhile. Karen may have thought she was untouchable, but in the end, her own arrogance became her undoing. She underestimated the power of community and the determination of one person willing to fight for what's right. As I stood outside my repaired well house, listening to the familiar hum of water flowing freely again, I realized something important. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that kindness, resilience, and unity can overcome even the toughest challenges. And trust me, there's no better feeling than watching someone walk straight into the consequences of their own making. People often ask me if I feel guilty about what happened to Karen. Honestly, not even a little bit. She brought this on herself by crossing lines no reasonable person should ever cross. Still, I learned an important lesson through all of this. Fighting fire with fire only works if you're smarter than the arsonist. You can't just react. You have to think ahead, plan carefully, and strike when the time is right. What really mattered most was reclaiming our sense of peace. Now, whenever I turn on the tap and see clean water flowing from our repaired well, I'm reminded of how far we've come. Sure, standing up to Karen was exhausting, but it also taught me the value of knowing your rights and using them wisely. It wasn't just about fixing a well. It was about setting boundaries and showing that no one can walk all over you without consequences. One thing I didn't expect was the way this whole ordeal changed the neighborhood. Before Karen's downfall, many of us kept to ourselves, too afraid of rocking the boat or drawing her attention. But after everything came to light, something shifted. Neighbors started talking more openly, not just about HOA issues, but about life in general. People shared stories of their own run-ins with Karen, revealing years of pent-up frustration they'd been too scared to express. Some even joked about forming a support group for Karen survivors. The atmosphere on Maple Ridge Drive feels lighter now, like a weight has been lifted. Kids ride bikes freely again. Laughter echoes through the streets, and nobody bats an eye when someone paints their door a funky shade of teal. Linda, the new HOA president, has done wonders restoring trust within the community. She listens to concerns instead of dismissing them, and she makes decisions democratically rather than dictating rules from above. For the first time since moving here, I truly feel like part of a neighborhood, not just a property owner trying to stay under the radar. As for me, I've become somewhat of a local legend. Folks joke about keeping me on speed dial whenever they run afoul of the HOA. A few neighbors have even stopped by to thank me personally, saying they wish they'd had the courage to stand up to Karen sooner. While I hope never to deal with another Karen anytime soon, I'll admit, it feels pretty great knowing we stood our ground and won. Still, I don't want anyone to think this victory came easily. There were late nights spent researching laws, tense conversations with Mark about whether we were doing the right thing, and moments where I doubted myself entirely. What if Karen retaliated? What if no one supported us? Those fears were real, and there were times when I wondered if it was worth the risk. But looking back now, I know it was. Sometimes you have to take a stand, not just for yourself, but for everyone affected by someone else's bad behavior. This experience also taught me the importance of preparation. If I hadn't taken the time to document everything, every email, every photo, every rule violation, I wouldn't have had the ammunition needed to hold Karen accountable. Details matter, evidence matters, and having a solid plan, that's priceless. Most importantly, though, I learned that strength isn't about yelling louder or acting tougher than the other person. It's about staying calm under pressure, thinking strategically, and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. Standing up to Karen wasn't easy, but it gave me confidence I didn't know I had. It showed me that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to back down. So here's my advice to anyone facing their own HOA nightmare, or any kind of bully for that matter. Document everything, stay calm, And don't be afraid to fight dirty if necessary. After all, sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to turn their own weapons against them. And trust me, there's nothing quite as satisfying as watching them walk right into your legal bait. These days, life on Maple Ridge Drive feels like a completely different story. The tension that once hung thick in the air has lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of community. Neighbors chat over fences again, sharing gardening tips or recipes. Kids ride bikes freely down the cul-de-sac, their laughter echoing through the streets. And best of all, no one bats an eye when someone decides to paint their front door a bold shade of teal or plant wildflowers in their backyard. It's almost hard to believe this is the same neighborhood where Karen ruled with an iron fist just months ago. As for me, I've become something of a local hero, though I'd never call myself that. People joke about keeping me on speed dial whenever they run into trouble with the HOA. Some neighbors have even dropped by to thank me personally, saying they wished they'd had the courage to stand up to Karen sooner. One elderly couple told me how much happier they feel now that the constant pressure to conform has eased off. Another neighbor admitted she finally painted her mailbox a cheerful yellow after years of being too intimidated to break the monotony of black and white. These small acts of freedom might seem insignificant, but they're proof that standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. Karen's departure left a void, but it also gave us a chance to redefine what our neighborhood stands for. Under Linda's leadership, the HOA has shifted its focus from micromanaging every detail to fostering a spirit of cooperation and respect. Decisions are made democratically now, with input from everyone, not just one person enforcing arbitrary rules. Monthly meetings feel less like interrogations and more like opportunities to connect. For the first time since moving here, I truly feel like part of a community, not just another name on a roster. Of course, there are moments when I think about Karen. Rumor has it she listed her house for sale shortly after resigning as HOA president, though no one knows for sure where she went. Some say she moved to a gated community where her controlling tendencies might blend in better. Others speculate she's lying low, licking her wounds, and plotting her next move. Whatever the truth, I hope she learned a lesson from all of this. Power isn't meant to be wielded recklessly. Rules exist to serve people, not control them. Looking back, I realized this experience changed me in ways I didn't expect. Before Karen dumped concrete into my well, I was content to keep my head down and avoid conflict. But taking a stand taught me the value of resilience, patience, and strategy. It showed me that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to back down, and when they work together toward a common goal. More than anything, it reminded me that kindness and fairness will always win in the end. Now, when I walk outside in the morning and hear birds chirping or see sunlight glinting off the repaired well house, I'm filled with a deep sense of gratitude. This place feels like home again, a real home, built on trust, mutual respect, and shared humanity. Sure, challenges may come our way in the future, but I know we'll face them together. After all, a strong community isn't defined by perfect lawns or matching mailboxes. It's defined by the strength of its bonds and the willingness of its members to support one another. And so, as I sit on my porch sipping coffee and watching Lily play in the yard, I smile knowing we've turned a nightmare into a new beginning. Life isn't perfect. It never will be. But sometimes, fighting for what's right makes all the difference.